I'll get that started and I'll watch for the others. Okay. So if I forget later on, make sure that recording is always on for Mary. So, okay. So how is everyone? Warm and safe? How many of you have no school tomorrow or have remote tomorrow? Pretty much everybody. Yeah. Us too. They announced that for us a little couple of hours ago. So that's all good, right? It's not too bad now, but it seems like it's going to really change in the next few minutes, next few hours for especially. So, anything exciting over the last week? Anything good news to share? Meredith, you look a lot better. You look healthier. Okay. Anything else from anyone? It's just such a chatty group. I don't know what to do with you, you know?
I can share a little bit. My daughter, who's one of my students, and then two of my other students are going to all state for choir next week for IMEC. So good timing with having asynchronous, so I can go to that. It's
That's
down in
awesome.
Peoria.
That's awesome. Okay. Well, safe travels. Yeah. And good luck. That'll be great. Any other good news? There's got to be something good happening. Well, I had a good, well, I had a challenging week, but a good week. My husband had to have some skin cancer surgery um, on, and it was complicated because it's right under the eye. So you had to go to specialists and things. So we had to go to the hospital on Wednesday, no, Tuesday, for what they call the Mohs procedure, where they keep going until they are sure everything is clear. I know I've had that on my face and whatnot. So we did that on Tuesday, but then he had to go back yesterday because they didn't want those surgeons didn't want to close the wound because it was so close to the eye. So he had to go to another one who specialized in plastic surgery around the eye to close the wound. So spent 2 long days downtown at Northwestern. So and driving Miss Daisy, as I told him, because he's got one eye, not functioning right now. But everything went well, and he's all clear. So just sort of looks like he's been in a fight. He's got a pretty good shiner. So I told him they should have given him a patch, like an eye patch, and then it'd be like having Captain Jack Sparrow around the house or something. He didn't find that amusing at all. So try to liven it up a little bit, though. Okay, so you had two interesting asynchronous videos. I hope you thought they were interesting. You had one that was all about crucial conversations, which I hope you found helpful and interesting. And then you had one on authenticity. So I'm thinking two, they weren't heavy, but I thought if we spend about 30 minutes on those in small groups, that should be good. So it's 5 after 5. I'm going to put you into three different groups and we'll plan on, I'll pop in and out as I usually do, but we'll plan on coming back then about 5:30, 5:35, depending on how your conversations go. Good enough? Okay, let me get the breakout room started. Okay, I hope you've got good notes and we'll have lively conversations, and I will be nagging you in a few minutes.
First one, PowerPoint. Sorry if you can hear my kid screaming in the background. He's having
Oh,
a
good.
moment. Um, okay, so the we'll start with the tell me so I can hear you slides and video. With which way of knowing do you think each teacher is making meaning? What evidence do you find in each vignette that points to, oh, here he is.
Okay, can I interrupt for just a second? Deb, those are not the right ones, right? Am I
No, I didn't. I watched the authenticity
and better
and
and crucial
crucial
conversation?
Crucial
conversations.
conversations. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I did.
I think what Deb is looking at is what's for next week. But
Ah,
here we go. Okay. So the two
did
for
I do
this
the
week.
wrong week? I'm sorry. I thought it
Yeah.
said the week of the 19th.
Well, if you look at it, each week we are discussing the ones from the week before. Okay. So this week we're going to be talking about crucial conversations and authenticity. Okay. So we can pick it up from there. Did you read those, Deb, or no? Watch those?
I think so. I'm looking back at my notes. I also have my 7-year-old in here having a moment. Maybe if you guys start, I'll jump in.
Okay.
All right, Meredith. When you're under stress, are you more likely to resort to silence or aggression? You're a silence, aren't you?
I am. I'm mostly a silent, especially until I have my facts and my emotions under control. And I really had to work very hard to mask those emotions and smile and nod, gather everything, and then be able to have those conversations. I would say, I mean, within the last couple years, I've really developed a better sense of who I am when I'm having those conversations. But we've been doing a 2-year book study that I've been helping lead at my school on difficult conversations. So this fell right with that. And then also, Dr. Smallman, you'll appreciate this. I'm literally teaching this week the difference between the logical brain and the emotional brain, and how our emotional brain takes over, and how we need to use strategies to calm down so we can think logically. So like my whole life just came together with that PowerPoint. I was giggling to myself. But so yeah, so I am a silent.
So what book are you using for the book study?
It is Better
Oh,
Conversations by
okay.
Jim Knight.
Yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, it's been great. We did it for 2 years. This year we're really focusing on that building trust factor chapter, as well as what that toxicity looks like within our school. We've had a lot of trust issues, and we're really, since we've done so much work, we're really getting some really good, authentic responses, honesty, transparency. It's been really great for our school.
Awesome.
Yeah.
But you're definitely one of those silence people, huh?
And yeah, again, until I have everything, like if I have done the research and I have my facts, I'm happy to have that conversation. But I make sure that I am very level-headed when I do that. So I'll stay silent until I know what I need to say and get my points across, and then I can have that conversation much easier.
I'm giggling and I think about this too because I can't quite picture you as the aggression.
Oh, no, I don't even think it's an aggression. It's that tone, that body language, that off the cusp thinking, that if I say something and I haven't thought it through, it comes across the wrong way.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah.
so I tend to just smile and nod, gather everything in, take notes, process, and then respond.
Okay, that's good. That's great. All right, carry on.
Yeah, I tend to ask questions just naturally to the
Mhm.
degree where sometimes I have to say, like, I'm not asking because I'm judging or like think you're doing something wrong. I'm
Mhm.
inquiring because I am curious. So I think that would be like a potential relative strength in all of this in terms of crucial conversations for me personally. I don't know how everybody else feels about number two.
Yeah, no, that does reminds me of part of our virtues paper because
Yeah.
I can't remember what was the question it asked about like your ability to like be able to entertain multiple perspectives on something like
Mhm.
it just kind of goes with that like
Yeah.
it's um and hopefully we're all doing that well now.
Yes.
I do too. I ask a lot of questions, and I think sometimes people think I'm asking questions to be mean or like I'm
Yeah.
trying to like get them to like I'm trying to like I'm questioning them, but in
Yeah.
reality, I just don't get in my own brain and I need to ask the question to clarify it for myself. Um, because I don't want to be wrong, and that's my problem. I hate being wrong. And so that's why I think I tend to be more curious, is because I want to know what they're doing. And if they're doing something I like, then why am I not doing it already? I don't know. Siobhan, I don't want to play. I don't want
I
to play.
think for me, it depends on the situation because at least in my work, my school, like when you question, even for curiosity, they're already standoffish and they don't
Mhm.
even want to talk about it. Because I remember I asked something, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I get that. So what else? And they're like, you could tell they didn't want to talk to me anymore. I'm like, I don't understand. I want to understand.
Mhm.
Um, they like being told what to do, and then they'll like nod their head and follow through. But then when you start asking questions, then they get very defensive. So I think it's a culture thing as well. It's building a culture that it's okay to talk, it's okay to ask questions, and it doesn't mean that it's a got you. Even when you're
That's a
saying it's not a
psychological safety.
got you, it's I just want to understand and help so I can understand your perspective or whatever the topic or might be at play. Um, but it's also because it's a district that when teachers have been used to pushing so much that eventually they get what they want. So I think changing that shift has been extremely hard administratively in general. We'll be getting a new principal next year again. So 3 years and here we go. So already everybody's mindset's like, all right, starting over next year. Who's coming? So
That's hard.
it's very hard. So we'll see how next year goes.
I agree, though, and it reminds me of we've had some conversations amongst our leadership teams about psychological safety and just kind of good teamwork. You're right, though. If you don't have it, like that, people are going to become defensive about questions. So Gabby, you've had a new principal the last 3 years. So
Well, since
this year,
our principal now, this is fourth or third, and he's not leaving us, but he is going into a human resource
okay,
position, which is what he planned in the future to eventually do. He just
okay,
didn't see it was going to pop up this quick
got it.
or opportunity, which we understand. But yeah, so,
Okay.
but the shift, everybody right now, we were just getting. Like he's the principal that stands his ground and doesn't give in, which I like. Not
Mm.
everybody likes, but now we're starting over. It feels like all over again. Now that we got used to a momentum, now it's like we don't know what could happen.
Yeah, no, that's hard.
So yeah. So last week's presenter with me resonated. It really resonated with the whole 3 years. Here we go again.
Yeah.
Even when I was told, I was just like, not to be a Debbie Downer, but I was like, does it matter what I do now? Because we all know it's going to change. Something always changes when someone new comes in.
Hmm.
But
Do you know who's going to come in?
well, the board meeting's tonight, so I'm not quite sure. I know some internal, they're a big district, applied. Some were external, and when I asked an administrator that we have confidence, she didn't tell me, but she didn't give me the best facial expression. So I was like, ugh, this may not be coming well. I know internally someone in my building applied and we were kind of shocked, but I don't know. I'm gonna remain positive.
Hmm.
Um, but I hope they really looked um deep into who it was and not just pick somebody to make sure we have someone for next year.
Yeah, for sure.
In before I like respond. So like I might kind of just be like, okay, like you really said that or something like and come off like almost like scary calm that like that can kind of like like that sometimes makes people more agitated, I feel like, because like if I'm not giving them like the satisfaction of like
Yeah, they want that
a
right.
negative reaction as well, like that's often what I do with my students. Like I'm just like, okay, that was a choice. And then like, we go from there and like, so I feel like for me, like it's not too challenging for me to remain patient, but what would kind of cause me to like have difficulties remaining patient is if like they kept interjecting when I was like trying to give a response to them, because that agitates me, like when people are like constantly like just cutting you off, you know?
Um, I was thinking about like in terms of like decision making and those conversations, like I feel like I probably it's harder to be patient because I like process things. I feel like I'm pretty quick to process and like make a decision, and I'm not one who likes to hem and haw about things. So I can get frustrated when others aren't the same way. I'm like, why are we still talking about this? What's happening?
And that's
Instead
how
of like, you know, being curious and being like, okay, they want to make sure that they're considering this point, this point, this point. I'm just like, oh, let's just do it.
And I am the exact same way, Ellen. When like with decision making, like I will in my head kind of think of all these different, perspectives and the different information, and we're gathering all of the information, but I want to make a decision and I want to move forward. I don't want to continue just hammering home like what the problem is and all the different things and what about this and what about that. I'm like, no, what are our action steps? What are we doing? Like, yes, we've talked about it. It's frustrating. This is the problem. It's an issue. Okay, what are we going to do about it? And oftentimes I feel like, especially when you get a bunch of women and teachers, especially together, we like to complain and we like to continue complaining about things. And I'm like, okay, yes, there is a time where we can just vent. And then so that's when I have to ask, and I usually ask the question, like if a teacher comes in and starts like talking to me about the problem, I go, am I listening to you vent or are we problem solving? Because if I'm listening to you vent, I will listen. You vent away. I am going to sit and I'll take it in and, give you that safe space that you need to vent. But if we're problem solving, then I want
Yeah.
to, like we have a finite amount of time where we're going to discuss, you're going to tell me like what the problem is, but then we're going to get to like, okay, what are our action steps and what are we doing moving forward? And some teachers have been very respectful of that and been like, I'm in here and I am venting. And I'm like, love it. Let me get my coffee. I will sit back and listen to this. But some teachers are like, no, I want to continue to talk about this. I want to continue beating this up. And I'm like, and that's when I start to lose patience because I'm like, no, I don't want to talk about it anymore. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are our actions? Let's move forward with this.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I feel with my like department, because it's like very much so like the male teachers like I don't know if like against is the right term, but like they like to just like circle back and like to the problem constantly without
No.
like just constant. Like today I threw out like, because they don't like to think far enough into the future. They think one day ahead. And I am the team leader, so I was like, all right, I put this on the agenda. We got to start thinking about next Friday. So we have access testing. We need to determine what are we doing in our gym spaces. And like one of the males was like, okay, and so what did you come up with? And I was like, no, no, no. I wrote brainstorm. This is a group, it's a collaborative conversation. I'm like, I have some ideas, but I want to hear what you guys think so that I'm not just sitting here being like, all right, this is what you're doing, and this is what you're doing. I'm like, we brainstorm together. And like they just like to just they they like to sit back and watch others create a plan and then pick at every little thing. Like I made a rotation schedule for there's 6 classes that join or that are in the gym spaces, and we have 4 gym spaces. So we have like a rotation, so it's equitable for all the teachers and their students in those spaces because some of them are not as great of gym spaces. And then they started complaining after I've spent hours on this document, and they were like, well, it would be better if we were only in one gym space the whole day. And I'm like, that doesn't work. That you can't join your 8th grade class cannot be with 6th grade. It doesn't work. I'm like, our PE leaders class is not allowed to combine with anybody. So they have to have their own. It's just like this whole thing. So, anyways, all this to say,
Really, like when I was thinking about this article, it was interesting to me too, just how much of this ties in with what I'm teaching kids.
Mm.
And then again, just putting in that authenticity piece for the next one, how, when I'm teaching, to be as authentic as possible, so the kids understand that these are real skills and having these conversations are difficult for everybody, not just them. So I kind of like that tie-in as well.
Yeah.
Um, do we want to move on to the next one?
I would love to.
Okay. Now I'm going to tell you, I did this one when I was not feeling very good, so I can't tell you my expertise is out there, but
You're good. This one, I mean,
Are we at the
we're on the number one for authenticity.
okay.
So this question really made me think, because when I was younger slash before, I was like, I was very affected by people who are fake or inauthentic. I was like, it affected me. What it shouldn't have, right? Like I can't control that other person, as I've learned. Um, so in the past, I wouldn't like that person, or I would judge that person, or I would have a bias towards that person. Now I've learned, or I just don't let it affect me as much. And I just, that's just where I'm at in life.
yeah, I think, when I think about that fake person, I mean, I'm instantly drawn to like high school level, like, almost like that pettiness,
Yeah.
that person who's always cheerful, but they're gossiping, they're backstabbing. And I feel like as adults, we still have those people in our lives, but I think we choose to steer clear of them so they don't have that impact about that. But I will still say, as an adult, those are not my most friendly. I mean, I'm not going to go and have lunch with these friends either.
Right.
I kind of steer clear of them, but they can't hurt me anymore. Where I felt like in high school and the younger me, high school was a long time ago, I allowed what they did and what they said like deeply emotionally hurt me, and that I don't allow anymore.
Yeah. No, I agree. You said it way more eloquently than
That.
And it doesn't matter how old you are and how far away you are from high school or junior high school. If you think about it, it's still there.
Yeah.
Yep. Another thing that I teach all day long.
Yeah, it makes me think. I really liked my cooperating teacher when I was student teaching. Really, really liked her. Looked up to her. She was definitely like a people pleaser, and but she like, I don't know, lacked the follow through. So you're like, she would be like, yes, of course, and then like, but you were like, are you really gonna do what you said you were gonna do? Like, like I don't really like. And I don't know. It was interesting. Like, but she always like just like had a smile on her face, and she'd always be like super pleasant. But then it would be like I and I'm like, I'm struggling to think of specific examples, but there's definitely times where like I'd be like, can we do this, or can I do, and I don't know if she was just like kind of flighty and forgot, or I don't know, but I was like, I do not trust that we're gonna like do that, or you're gonna do that, or we're gonna do, I don't know. It was really interesting, but I really liked her. It was complicated.
8th grade.
Oh my God, high school? No, I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
I'm getting old just by being a high school teacher.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
The things they say. Oh my God. Okay, again, off topic, but you need to watch. If ever, Darlene mostly needs to watch. Maybe if you have middle school, watch the new SNL skit from this past weekend when they do a podcast. It sounds like our students, and it made me cringe very, very hard.
I will. I was too busy geeking over the Stranger Things one where they're like in the 90s.
That
Yeah.
was do you want to talk about our 5 pillars? I was not surprised by my results. I will say that.
Oh crap, where did I write down?
To be honest, to be clear, my integrated life was the lowest.
Integrate.
Although I do think I show up as my true self, I am not always balancing priorities or prioritizing my self-care. So
Yeah, that sounds about right for me.
And for once, I'm an all-star at that right now.
that's true.
Like I am rocking it out.
Yeah.
Your girl took 2 naps today.
Yeah,
I want to be you, darling.
I was not surprised by the results. I was surprised how low my integrated life score was, but something I'm at least aware of. So that's why my self-awareness was average.
I gotta find mine.
Was anybody else surprised?
Mine sounds, I wasn't surprised about mine. Mine sounds about right. I'm like, okay. I gotta refind it. I had it in my notes. I have so many notes.
I felt like today's Darlene and 6 months ago Darlene would have such completely different results that
Interesting
it was
about it.
like I feel like my self-awareness is really high, but it's not a bad thing right now, which is good.
Yeah, I don't think
like every time I feel like every week I'm like, well, in therapy, this is what I'm doing.
These questions remind me of the ones that we had to do for the self-assessment. So when I was looking at the questions, I was also looking at what my admin said about me in those situations. Because you know how sometimes you're like, yeah, I do that. But then you look and I'm like, wait, other people don't think I do that. So why? Like what made, so then I'll kind of adjust it.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
I actually questioned some of my one administrator a little bit. Not question, I was curious as to why she gave me what she gave me. And I always wanted her to be part of that because she's known me since I walked in the district. She hired me. She evaluated me as a teacher. I worked in committees with her. We worked very closely together when I got into this new role. And there was one where she marked me down on.
I
And
got
I asked
too.
her, and there was a keyword that bothered it. That was just like, really, the micromanages. And
Yes.
I go, do you think I micromanage, or what is there so I wanted to know why, like so I could improve or just get, I don't know, get some actual feedback instead of like get that.
Yeah.
She says, well, sometimes you can't know everything, but I disagree because I ask questions because we have a new like director, assistant superintendent. In the past, I used to be a little bit more transparent about where things are going. And now it's not so transparent. And I understand why they don't say much is because they don't want to overwhelm anybody and things could change. And we're flying the plane as we're building it in a way. But I think it's important for me in my role to know a little bit so I know how we can support or what other feedback I could bring and just have an idea of where they're going, not because I want to know everything.
Right.
So I disagreed with her on that one because I was like, it's not that I want to know everything. I really don't. But I'm trying to understand the big picture of where we're going because that's going to impact, I feel like, how you lead a team or how you roll something out. And but they're not there yet thinking. And that's where I was like, yeah, I think I personally disagree. After learning everything, and it's just like, no, I think it's important to know certain things.
Well, it's like with
So, surprised that we did not.
Mhm.
We are done discussing.
we are.
You are the super fast group again.
Oh my gosh,
Oh,
we took so long.
it was
Jeez.
like almost a half hour.
You're not quite. You've got
Oh.
yeah, about 3 more minutes. You'd have your half hour.
We're so close.
You're very, very good just because you're curious, and you want to get things done.
We like
I mean, we hit all the
the
questions,
point.
so
We did. Even talked about our authenticity scale, even though it wasn't an official question.
yep.
We discussed it.
How was that with the authenticity scale? How did you measure up?
Well, we were saying we didn't really know what the totals were then going to measure towards. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But it was interesting to go through
Mhm.
and kind of be like, "Ooh, yeah, I'm gonna rate myself kind of low on that one. I probably need to work on that. Like, I know that I am a people pleaser, so like I find myself changing my opinion or like mirroring other people's opinions in conversations and such. I'll be like, yes, yes. And like, so I'm like, yeah, I need to.
What about the pillars? Where did you measure up there?
I was saying, uh I said I think I'm really strong in like the committed to bettering themselves because I feel like I'm hard on myself and I'm always like, oh, I should do this better. I need to work on this and work on this and work on this. I was saying the inspiring faith this seems like really lofty or intense or something, but I think we do that more than we realize in terms of like, it's more just like, are people confident that you're going to do, the right thing and lead the ship in the right direction?
Okay, I'll call everybody back. You sound like you're tired of talking about it. Couple more. Somebody's still talking. Okay. Were there any particular aha moments or things that you discussed that would be nice to share with the whole group? Such a chatty group.
We just had a discussion about the pillars of authentic leadership. And the last one is they inspire faith, and just really what does that mean and what does that look like as an authentic leader. And then one of the things that I mentioned was how, there are times where you might think that you're inspiring faith, but, you know, the other person may not see it that way, and making sure that we're focusing on what we can control versus what we can't control.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And also recognizing that, going way back to 500 and thinking about ways of knowing where people are, you know. Again, we're pretty conscientious about making sure things that are developmentally appropriate and differentiating for our students, but we don't often necessarily do that for our peers. And that's really important because they're just as needy of that as our students are, right? And if you're in a leadership position, perhaps even more so, because it's really critical that you recognize where people are and lift them and build their capacity to move forward. But if you're working with someone who's at that instrumental level, you're not going to get them all the way up to self-authoring. It's going to take time. So just thinking back to the things that we talked about, and you'll see a little bit more about that in this week's asynchronous work, where we kind of touch back to Ellie Drago Severson and how she takes those ways of knowing and now talks about it in terms of how do we use it as a leader, giving feedback and receiving feedback. So kind of bringing that around to another cycle. So the topic for the presentation tonight, I'll be perfectly honest with you, this is the first time I've done it. I've had a lot of people, both peers and students, talk about the importance of AI and how do we handle AI these days, and all the questions about it. And so I did some studying. I did my own little book club, and I really dug into the work of Tony Frontier. Some of you may have read his book. I don't know. It's called AI with Intention. Has anyone read it? Okay. Well, then that's good because I'm actually going to summarize part of it for you. So the book is AI with Intention. It's a 2025, so it's a new book. It's ASCD. I found it really to be fascinating because I was someone who was like a little bit nervous about using things that are AI and not quite sure how to trust things and not at all sure. Like, I've had people that are telling me, oh, AI is terrible, and I have others telling me AI is wonderful. And I've talked with people who are absolutely afraid to use any part of it and hate it and condemn it. And I've talked with other colleagues that find it just can be such a wonderful tool, recognizing how you use it. So I was fascinated with Tony's book about it being intentional because he's a really strong educator. So what I'm going to kind of share with you tonight, and I'm not quite sure how the pacing is going to go, so forgive me if it's the first time going through it, but I think there's some really good things to talk about that I can share with you. The book is written in two halves. The first half of the book is for leaders, school leaders, and the second half of the book is for teachers. So to me, any of you are interested in, want to get someone buy you a graduation gift, I think it's well worth buying it. It's not super expensive. I think it was probably like $20 or more, somewhere in that range. Um, but I kind of needed it for myself. And so, I said, okay, I'm going to dig into this and I'm going to present it to my darlings and see, if it's something that seems like it's impactful with you. Now, I'm feeling really guilty with Ellen sitting there because I have a feeling that she's going to tell me that she knows all of this stuff and she should be doing this lecture. And so, Ellen, you can chime in anytime because I know technology is your passion, your forte, and please, if I'm screwing up, let me know. But I do think this is something that's stretching me and in learning more about it. And so I think looking at it through the lens of what leaders need to know and what we need to know in our classrooms and in our different roles, I'm going to try and take you there tonight. So let's take a look at PowerPoint. And again, this is not original. I'm summarizing the great work that was done by Tony Frontier, putting this all together. So again, unmute at any time and jump in and say, hey, you're off base, or ask a question or whatever. And I'm going to just kind of see how the pacing of it goes. I'm not quite sure. I think I probably put way too much in here, which is something I tend to do in the beginning. So if I start skipping around or say, okay, let's take a break and we'll all exhale and come back, that, just understand and give me a little grace if you don't mind. So Tony Frontier, if you're not familiar with him, he's an award-winning educator. He really has he works with teachers, he works with school leaders, he works nationally, he works internationally, and he really is all focused on, improving student learning. And right now, with the way AI is really sweeping into districts and schools, I agree that we really need to be able to assess the benefits, but also the limitations of these tools if we're going to be able to decide how they serve us and how they could serve our students. And I think expanding our knowledge about it will help us to use the tools not only effectively, but I think also responsibly. So I agree that new technologies can be really exciting. And Dr. Frontier always talks about the fact that, it's how we respond to these is more important than the actual innovation themselves. And what we really need to better understand and incorporate, we really need to understand AI so we can incorporate it in ways that actually support effective teaching and learning rather than undermining it. So that's something that I think is definitely worth talking about and thinking about. Um, let's see if I can manage this both ways. So when we're talking about AI, one of the things that I think is important to think about is that, there's been a lot of hype, right? There's been a lot of hype about, AI. There's been a lot of hype about, urgency around it. But when you think about it, I mean, we really still are kind of in the infancy of this era, right? What these kinds of transformative tools, when they become available, they really kind of prompt more questions than answers. But the questions that we ask often reveal a lot less about the transformative nature of the actual tool and more about how we value the existing system. And Tony Frontier talks about how when he travels around the country and he works with different educators and explores social media posts for AI educator groups, the questions you see on the screen here are the two most often that he sees. And he talks about the fact that, okay, these are important questions, but when you look at them placed in sequence, it's kind of ironic. I mean, that the questions speak to the fact that teachers and students are basically overwhelmed with the amount of information and the number of expectations they face on a daily basis. And so they're looking for ways to use AI tools as all tools have been used in the history of human time. Mostly when we look at new tools, we're looking at how can we accomplish the work of value more efficiently. And that's pretty much, going back to all of the different tools that we've actually had, that have been come through mankind as we've gone along. So when you think about that, it's, when you think about Chat GPT, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but when 3.5 came out in November of 2022, which I did not know that, but when that one came out, that's when that kind of artificial intelligence actually became very accessible. This particular version of AI, an AI tool, was one that was the first one that was able to respond to conversational language, and no special programming language was necessary. All you really need for ChatGPT from 3.5 on forward is just access to the internet. And now since then, new AI models have been developed. They're even more improved. They have better capacity, they have more accuracy, more fluency and modality, and they're more reliable. And really, pretty much they're going to be everywhere. I think they're going to be like smartphones and the internet. They're just going to be found everywhere. But it's important to be cautious because just because a tool can be used to accomplish a task more efficiently doesn't necessarily mean it's more effective. Anytime we're looking at these, there are always benefits and costs. So if you think, for example, the internet, everybody was so excited when, it was first out. It allowed information to be shared and accessed really pretty easily. But the increased capacity of having that internet around has resulted in a world where we got a lot of low quality information, a lot of clickbait kinds of things happening on the internet. Social media as well was really, when it first came out, was like, wow, more access to social networks than at any time in human history. But we found that as that progressed, there's been an increase in the feelings of isolation and loneliness and stress. So when you take a look at the things that are on this slide, the costs and benefits of AI in teaching and learning are going to be determined by how they're used. And I think thinking about it here is kind of interesting because as you can see, they have the capacity to plan and accomplish almost any academic task. They have nearly unlimited capacity to support effective teaching and learning, but they also have nearly unlimited capacity to undermine effective teaching and learning. So that kind of is a scary thought when you're moving at it. Dr. Frontier says that the greatest threat that AI poses to education may not be that students use tools to teach, but that they receive answers from AI tools and they think they've learned something. And potentially even worse, they may come to see intelligence as something that's external, instantaneous, effortless, rather than something that's developed through a process that's internal and circuitous and effortful. So in other words, they may really not understand what teaching and learning is all about. I'm going to stop for just a moment there. Have you had any experience with students using AI tools in your classes?
I teach high school English, of course I do.
Absolutely. So it may perhaps not being used in the most appropriate manners or most effective manners.
It is the devil. Yes. In that sense, it is the devil.
In that sense. Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think that's a perfect example of where students think they've learned something because they've had ChatGPT or one of the other AI tools create something for them. Okay, so we'll plow through here and see if you can stay with me. So when you think about it, the thing I like about Tony's work is that he's very strong about the fact that intentional teaching and learning is the key, right? So if we talk about teaching and we think that that's really where we create the conditions where we hope students will become intrinsically motivated to apply their effort and really learn deeply. And that really requires intentional action both on the part of the teacher and on the part of the learner. So he organized his book around four guiding principles for school leaders and four guiding principles for teachers. And we're going to look at just the guiding principles for school leaders because I want to kind of look at what he does there. But he has an essential question that he presents, and he said, how can leaders build the capacity to ensure that AI tools are used effectively to support intentional teaching and learning? And he's really big on using those words intentional. And I think that makes a big difference when we're talking about using these tools. So when we're talking about these intentional tools, um, the first one he talks about is lead by learning. And he talks about he quotes a computer scientist who recently said, we're at the beginning of a new technology area. And the easiest way to mismanage technology is to misunderstand it. And I think that's a pretty strong statement. So when you think about developing a shared understanding of what AI is and isn't, we can then make better informed decisions about how to use it in our classrooms. So the first principle we're going to look at is this one here that talks about leading by learning. We're going to talk about building a shared understanding of what AI is and isn't. The other thing is looking at making choices. Are we going to be part of a learning organization or a reactive organization? And then I'm going to take you into each of the steps that he talks about here in terms of guiding action steps that we can take. And you can jump in with questions anytime. So, um, so the first thing he talks about in this section is, where did we go? The first thing he talks about here is the difference between learning organizations and reactive organizations. And I think you can see that the definitions are pretty clear here. But the idea is that if you're, you know, looking at leaders of learning organizations, this is where people are really looking at continuous learning, right? And when you think about reactive organizations, well, that's generally where people think, well, if problems arise, it's because there were unforeseeable external forces or isolated issues. And so what happens there is there tends to be shifting the burden, right, of who's responsible or who's to blame. And I think in schools, there's often the tendency to blame students or parents or technology as the source of the problem. But if we absolve ourselves completely from responsibility, then we also disempower ourselves from taking any action. And so when you think about leading a learning organization, you have to begin with the premise that we all need to be continuous lifelong learners so that we can be responsive because the world is not static. And I think those of you that have been teaching, for any length of time, you know that it's not static at all. So when we think about action step number one, one of the things I think that's kind of interesting is, we have to understand the basic form and function of something. And I think that's a little bit interesting. And I found this part really helped me to understand a little bit more about it. Because one of the things he talks about is that, we tend to think about AI as an overnight thing that happened that was, this overnight success and has been developed so quickly. But it was actually the result of about 80 years of work. And there were mathematicians and linguists and computer scientists who were all working on that. And for most of those 80 years, these AI models that they were working with were not even reliable enough to be functional. But in 2017, they made a big breakthrough. And that breakthrough allowed them to dramatically improve the capacity to interpret and to generate understandable text. So that means, before that, we talked about search engines, right? What we look at a search engine, he calls it like look up and fetch, right? A search engine is built on computer codes, the whole idea is that it accesses content through keywords. So, for instance, if a web page has specific keywords, it'll be presented with a link that the search engine yields, and then it's up to you to go through the list and determine which links are most available and most relevant to what you need. But when you look at a large language model, and that's technically the name for this, which I thought was really interesting to know, like ChatGPT is a large language model. And that means it does not use that look up and fetch approach. It's actually trained using deep learning, and it's a type of AI that really interconnects the hierarchies and it detects patterns across thousands of layers and scenarios. The AI tools have learned basically to do this by observing how words are grouped across millions of scanned books and huge amounts of internet data. And the most powerful ones, like ChatGPT, have been pre-trained on so much data that they can make meaning of, generate conversational or natural language for nearly almost any purpose in any format. And that I thought this was fascinating. That's how ChatGPT got its name. It is a generative, pre-trained transformer that can chat using natural language. So what is it and why does it work? I really dug into this, probably because I'm kind of nerdy, but if we strip away all the mathematical and linguistic complexity, it works by producing a reasonable continuation of whatever text it's got so far. So when you think about writing after seeing what people have written on billions and billions of web pages, so it has all of this data that's been uploaded and it searches that and predicts what would most normally come next. So when you think about step two, there are a lot of misconceptions. And I know I had many in my head. And when you think about it, some people, when you talk about artificial intelligence, it might be, maybe Darlene, this might be you, but they think of it as like apocalyptic, right? Science fiction. For other people, they look at it like, oh, it's a silly tool and I can write poems about cats or things like that. But we need to move beyond the misconceptions and really understand it. So we're going to look at three different misconceptions. And I think these are kind of fascinating. So the first one, and I have a tough time pronouncing this, but uh, Tony Frontier says, don't anthropomorphize technology. And I had to kind of swallow that and think about what that meant. But basically, if you've ever heard someone say, well, that's what Google told me, that's what you've witnessed. The attribution of human traits or emotions or intentions to something that's a non-human entity. So when we anthropomorphize technology, we're deflecting our attention away from the actions and the intentions of the people using the technology. The person who says Google told them is admitting the fact that they were responsible for typing in a specifically worded question, selecting a particular search result. And the challenge lies in the fact that AI can engage in dialogue and use colloquial language, but should never, ever, ever be described as a living or thinking things. And we need to help students to think more clearly about the form and function by using precise language, language that accents the user's role, because the user prompts and needs to check, needs to modify, needs to augment, needs to revise, or even ignore the output. So when we move on to the next one, which is thinking of it as a monolith, and that's not true either. Artificial intelligence is not a single thing. It really refers to a broad range of technologies and models developed by hundreds of researchers and being used in thousands of different ways by millions of different people. So in other words, saying AI is good or AI is bad or AI is the devil is a bit like saying a book is good or bad or the devil. So one way to avoid thinking about that is to clarify what you're talking about. And I think there are three things that you need to think here. If you're talking about AI, an AI model, or an AI tool, which was really kind of an aha moment for me. But when you talk about using precise language, then you can avoid kind of sweeping generalizations. So if you're talking about the term AI, you're just talking about a broad field of data of science. If you're using the term AI model, then you're probably describing the behind the scenes features of something like a large language model, like ChatGPT. If you're using the term AI tool, then you are describing the interface the user sees and interacts with on their computer screen. So really important to make sure that you understand the difference between all of those. The other thing that Tony Frontier talks about is it's so, so, so important to avoid what we call automation bias, right? So he gives a silly example, right? Because he says it's really important. You have to be skeptical. You have to realize they are not omniscient, and just like me on the screen, it can include errors, and that AI can actually what they call hallucinating. So he gives a silly example that in 2012 there were a group of tourists visiting Australia, and they actually drove their car right into the ocean. Now, the GPS app that they were using did not have updated information, and it didn't know that the road they were supposed to take had been submerged in a tidal event. pretty silly, right? To be just trusting that it's going to be right all the time. And he would say these kinds of tourists were victims of what we call automation bias. The propensity to put faith in a technology even when it looks like it's clearly wrong. He says, for instance, if the tourist had asked and stopped a local for directions, and the local said, well, take this road right into the ocean, drive through the water for a mile and turn right, they would not have taken his advice. So, while there does seem to be something magical about these large language models, I mean, I'm amazed when I put a question in or I add some information and that little cursor blinks for just a few seconds. And then it shoots out a sensible response at 100 plus words a minute. It does seem to have a command of fluency, but it seems like it must transcend humans, but it's really important to be skeptical. There can be a lot of mistakes, there can be falsehoods, and no matter how magical it may appear, the output should always be subject to fact checking, verification, and basically common sense. So I want to pause there and ask if you've had any experiences where you got, crazy results from things that you put in AI tools, or any experiences that you've had with them at all.
With ChatGPT, it does not do well with any kind of graphic. So any picture, and if you want to add words to it, it spells everything wrong. So my husband was actually 2 years ago, he started the baseball team at the junior high, and we're the Jefferson Junior High Wolverines. And so he was trying to create the logo and what it's going to look like on uniforms and hats and things like that. And so he was like, "Oh, I'll have ChatGPT create it." And so it did a great job of generating the Wolverine, but the word Wolverine in every example that it gave was spelled completely wrong, and embarrassingly so incorrect. That you would not think that a smart computer robot would spell Wolverine incorrectly, but it does with every graphic, and it's still like that. So there are AI programs that were built specifically for pictures and graphics and things like that. So it's evolved since, but ChatGPT just can't. Just doesn't know how.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful with it.
And it's not a thinking thing, and don't anthropomorphize it. It's not a thinking thing. It's not a human, right? So it depends on what's been fed in, and like you said, how important to check that, right? Someone else had, I think, unmuted that was going to make a comment.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of chime in. So about 2 years ago, our school district did a whole thing on AI and AI tools for teachers and stuff, and how we can use it as educators to help build lessons and stuff. And we were noticing some of the same things, like here's our lesson objective and our lesson outcome, here's the standard, and what it was spitting out wasn't matching what we needed it to match. So as much as they were promoting it, oh, use this, do this, it didn't give us that quality work that we're used to.
And it's evolving, and it's probably getting better, but it still is only as good as what's been fed in. Yeah, so that's it. And it also is only as good as the questions that you ask. So let's get back to that. I do like that idea, though, that example of the car going into the water. So, so the third thing that he talks about here is to really make sure that you identify the patterns and the trends and in the development. So when you think about it, AI tools that are responsive to natural language was a huge advance, right? And that's becoming increasingly sophisticated. I think ChatGPT 5 is out now, and people are sometimes using, those tools as like almost a personal assistant, a writing coach or a math tutor, those kinds of things. I know I had one conversation with one of my sons, and he was talking about, he fed in a lot of information about the kinds of, reports and things that he does and observations, and then tells ChatGPT to spit it back in his own words, that kind of thing. I even met an educator, which kind of gave me the shivers, that said he uploaded a lot of his evaluation letters of his staff, and had then put his observation notes in there and had ChatGPT write the letters, which I thought was a little scary. But the thing is, these types of AI tools, and as Sarah said, it can make images or videos, based on prompts, but it can make big mistakes, right? And you're right, it's becoming increasingly sophisticated, but all tools will make mistakes. And what you have to think about is the mistake due to a limitation of the tool, which it certainly could be, or a misapplication of the tool for its intended purpose, or even if it was an operator error. So while these tools are becoming increasingly capable and accurate and reliable, and it's scary because it used to take about a year to develop a robust AI model based on large amounts of data, and now it takes less than a week. So it's going to change. Things are going to vary in terms of capability and functionality and cost. There's a gentleman by the name of Ethan Mollick, Mollick, and I think he's out of Wharton, and he actually has a blog, and he does an easy to understand analysis of various tools, which is a nice way to do it too. But the thing I think is also important to remember is that AI is a profit-driven industry, okay? It is the job of AI companies to say, how could this tool be used to make a profit? And it's our job as educators to ask, but how would this tool support intentional teaching and learning? I think AI is creating a lot of ethical and legal and policy questions and changes. The bottom line is the genie's out of the bottle. I don't think we can put it back. I think it's here to stay, but we need to have some guardrails in place. And I think as educators, we need to be continually aware of the challenges that can arise when either students or staff use or misuse these tools. The effectiveness and the utility of an AI tool still largely depends on the user. And as they become more powerful and easy to use, it's the user's responsibility to really frame tasks and problems in a meaningful way so that you can properly understand, the tool's output. That's going to be really vital. And prompting AI tools has more to do with the domain expertise than technology expertise. So your expertise in your content and your curriculum can help you apply the language necessary to interact with that tool effectively. So what are we thinking about in terms of challenges? So obviously students are going to be using AI tools. And just because it's age restricted or blocked at school does not mean they aren't using them on their phones or at home. Administrators and teachers need to be vigilant and ensure that students are not being assigned tasks or cannot access those types of websites at school that violate their user agreements or local policies or even federal guidelines. There are some things to think about. Thanks to AI, it is possible that any student with internet connection and access to an endlessly patient, well-informed tutor with the ability to explain or assist with content can really match their level of need. So it could minimize some of the opportunity gaps. But they also have the potential to deepen existing opportunity gaps because often students who struggle with their coursework are less likely to access their resources the way their higher achieving peers would do. And we have to make sure that they just don't become another recourse in something that's only used by those who are more advantaged. Also, I think it'll create new challenges for teachers. Teachers need to understand what students can and cannot do independently. And when they use AI tools, it's really hard to know that reliably. So we have to rethink about how we're going to assess students so that we can ensure the integrity that the evidence are showing is evidence of learning, right? And the other thing is, I think the AI tools may create challenges for educators in supporting students' social emotional needs. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General issued an advisory on social media and the impact on youth health. And the report cites a range of studies, and it brings in a lot of information about increased risk of depression, bullying, anxiety, negative body image, lower self-confidence, particularly among adolescents who spend more than 3 hours a day on social media. That sounds like a lot, but I think there's a large number of children that do that. So it's easy to see that AI could actually exacerbate these challenges. And these new realities that impact our students and their social emotional well-being, we've got to be prepared to confront those types of things. On the next slide, I'm not going to elaborate on it, but this is in Frontier's book. He talks a lot about understanding the jargon of AI. And we can look these up and we can look at all of those. I think, depending on how deep you want to get into it, I don't feel we all have to know those definitions. And he also talks about something called the Gartner hype cycle. I don't know if any of you are aware of that. I had never heard of it before. But he talks about the importance of understanding that it's a way to look at new innovations and how we respond to them. And he talks about it usually begins with an innovation trigger, and then there's this big peak of inflated expectations, and then it's followed by a dip in where there's more disillusionment, and then there's kind of this move towards enlightenment and more realistic expectations, and then we actually get to a plateau of productivity. And so he thinks that it's important to understand that there is this type of thing. You don't have to remember the name of it or whatnot, but that with any of these new technologies, in the early phases, it's really wise to be curious, but also skeptical. Ask questions, challenge assumptions, seek facts. What is effective? What's deliverable? Because it's kind of, there's a lot there, a lot we can think about. The second guiding principle that he talks about is taking a transformational approach. And I think this is something that we're a little bit more, familiar with because we've talked about transformational leadership versus transactional leadership. And he talks about the way that effective leaders, which we know, apply different strategies and different types of challenges. And we take on different leadership styles and different types of challenges. So sometimes when you think about it, we can say someone's a very effective leader if they just manage the status quo, right? But they also need to be able to manage change and navigate change. And there's different levels of change. We've got first order change, which is gradual, where there's existing knowledge and skills and strategies, and they can be applied to navigate this change successfully. But then when we have something like second order change, which I think this entire AI movement is it's really more seismic. It's the same kind of thing as we saw in that Gartner cycle, where there's a triggering event that involves a dramatic departure from something that's expected, and it really alters the system in ways that require us to think and to act differently. So when we think about these things with transactional versus transformational leadership, remember your transactional approaches emphasize pursuing outcomes or goals in exchange for rewards, recognition, or compensation. The core assumption is that leadership, that outcomes can really be improved by creating incentives and help others moving and modifying things this way. When you think about transformational, however, this is where individuals must both be challenged and supported to think differently about the very nature of the work they engage in. And so a transformational approach to leadership emphasizes the importance of looking at your staff individually, look at the intellectual stimulation, think about motivation, and really think about the influence. Frontier says that one of the greatest mistakes leaders make is treating a transformational challenge as though it's a transactional problem. So to move on to that, he's got some action steps that he recommends. And he talks a lot about this. And he says, the first thing is think about this idea of a status quo response. So something like this might be in your district, it might have been in the past, blocking local access to something that's widely available. Because this could really increase the digital divide since students with access to these school tools outside of school can use them. So maintaining the status quo and blocking access to these things in school ignores the fact that students may be using them in a way that harms their learning. And that if we don't allow them to come into the school and use them in school, they won't have opportunities to learn how to use the tools effectively or responsibly. The other thing, too, is that, some examples of transactional approaches would be, some people just simply add the words artificial intelligence or add consequences into their policies. Sometimes they put in a learning goal that says, there's a problem if you use AI tools too frequently or without guidance and support. And then sometimes they put in things that say, well, that there's got to be a broader strategy for how and when and why to use them. These are kind of transactional because they all rely on consequences or incentives or acquisition, and they're surface level approaches. They're really not going to build the capacity of people to help them adapt in ways to really move through what we would call a second order change. So when you think about it, transactional ways kind of diminish the results. So if you think about, consider the student who applies and uses an AI tool to complete an assignment. That's a transactional action. And then put that student in the classroom of a teacher who's also embraced the transactional, tool and uses AI to design lessons, create assessments, and grade student work. So this kind of leads to a scenario where the teacher uses AI tools to design assignments, the student uses AI tools to complete the assignment, and then the teacher uses the AI tool to grade the assignment. So when you think about it, what started out as a quest for efficiency is really just two sides of entry specialists tweaking algorithms, and the end result is, the work is devoid of relevance, and no learning has taken place. That's the bottom line. When you have a transformational approach, that's when you're looking at things at a systems level. And so acknowledging that problems emerge when AI tools come around may actually have more to do with our own existing mental models and choices and strategies than with the tool itself. So that a transformational approach would look at root causes of problems, so that you could be less likely to spend time on reacting to symptoms, right? And it's important not to confuse more effort with effectiveness. More effort only produces better results if it's intentionally aligned to effective strategies or addresses the root cause of the problem. Start asking questions like, why are our students cheating? Why are they overwhelmed? So it's really important not to confuse efficiency with effectiveness. Greater efficiency is really a mirage unless we have good results. The next action step that he talks about for this one is talking about the importance of asking transformational questions. And I thought this was really interesting. So the questions we ask can really determine the answers, right? And status quo questions are based on the premise that we need to take action to maintain the system and strategies as they exist. But when you think about it, the underlying assumption, if we say, who will ensure that students can access AI tools on the local network? Where should we reference AI in the current academic integrity policy? Those kinds of questions is talking about, there's a problem, but there's no solution. There's no decision. And I think it was one of the small groups, people were talking about the importance of making those decisions. So transformational questions are actually the ones that you see on this slide. And these are ones that are really important to think about. And I think these are ones that if you're working with AI in your buildings, it's worth spending some time having conversations about these. The leader's job is to build the capacity of those in their care to better meet the needs of the children they serve. And so one way to do this is to ask these kinds of transformational questions to challenge existing assumptions, stimulate discussions, and support new ways of thinking if we're going to make a second order change. The third action step that he talks about is also very important because he talks about the importance of putting purpose and pedagogy before technology. There's kind of an unspoken assumption that if we access more information, do more, cover more, students will learn more. I'm not so sure that's true. Generative AI has a capacity to push out even more information, and students, much more than the students have a capacity to even actually pull it in. And students can, complete their work with just a few keystrokes. So that's problematic, right? So it's important to have clear alignment between purpose and pedagogy. So designing units and assessments and assignments with the end in mind, which is basically the backward design we've always talked about. Showing care for our students by helping them to prioritize their efforts to learn. If we're not clear about our purpose for teaching, we shouldn't put AI-generated resources in front of our students just because they're there and we can. Action step 4 that he talks about is, I think this one is really fascinating. And this is where he talks about the importance of playing with the tools. As teachers and as leaders, we should play with these tools. I love these questions on the screen. And I think this is a slide that I would encourage you when you have some time to just do this. He recommends doing this in a team meeting or a faculty meeting where you have these low stake opportunities to kind of practice and play with it, because people have a wide range of comfort and familiarity with these things. So he talks about, ask the AI tool a question, challenge the tool, chat with it. It's really kind of creepy. I know when I go in there now, it's hysterical because I open up Chat GPT and it goes, "Hello, Maureen, what can we talk about today?" And it just kind of pushes buttons in me. But I like his suggestion here about ask the AI tool to quiz you on a topic that you know really well. pretend to be a novice and just see what it generates. That can really be very enlightening. It's also interesting to do the opposite and ask the AI tool to quiz you on a topic that you don't know anything about and see what it produces. You want to test the limits of what it knows or it doesn't know. You want to be creative with it, but you also want to be very serious with it. All right, I'm going to pause there for a minute because I can't see the clock. Yeah, it's 6:18. So I've been talking for a long time, and those are the first two sets of principles that he talks about. What are your thoughts about that last slide about playing with it? How many of you have taken time to just play with AI tools? Share any experiences, good or bad?
I used it when we were studying for our principal exam. Like I was having it generate me some more like practice tests and things like that, to help me prepare.
So what did you upload? What data did you
So
get?
I told it the tests that I was taking. I said like I'm taking the Illinois da 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 and all that, and I was like, can you generate some questions? And so it did, and I was like, these seem easier than what's on the test. Can you make me some harder ones? What about some essay ones? And I kept kind of working with it.
And did it help?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it gave me some more opportunities to practice those like essay questions.
So did you just really kind of told it the test. So you didn't upload like say the test framework or any of the sample
No.
data?
And I then like after we took the test here, this is kind of unrelated, but I like uploaded my score report and I was like, what does this tell me about me? Because as I looked at it, my eyes kind of went cross to like all the information that was on it.
My limited experience has been that the more you give it, the better the response is going to be. So just listening to what you said there, if I were to do that, I would go back into, where we have the test framework and I've gotten some practice test samples and things like that. I think I would upload all of that and then say, generate some questions based on that because then it's gonna have more information. It probably, it's only as good as what you've put in there or someone else has put in there.
Yeah, it was interesting. I did it in both chat and in Gemini, and Gemini made like an interactive quiz, which was nice, versus chat was like, just a straight up like, Word document type quiz.
And Gemini, I'm not as familiar with. So would you say is it newer than ChatGPT 5?
It's no, so they're all kind of they're running on the same model because it's public. It's just school districts are more using Gemini because we already have our information in Google and it's a little bit more secure. So like running student data through there is there. And it's also within like if you already have the Google Workspace, it's kind of built in there. So it goes directly into your drive and connects to those apps.
So it's owned by Google, take it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Other experiences, positive or negative?
I use ChatGPT almost every day when I'm writing my school announcements and I say, make this better and make this more exciting for the kids. And it will just pop out just a different way of what I want to say. So it's more of a this is our competition for this week. This is what we're doing. So I love it that way because there's only so many ways I can say be respectful, responsible, and safe. So it does help me that way. And I love it for that. But that's about what I use it for.
Yeah, I found a few things that I've used it for that were interesting. And I think again, it creeps me out a little bit, but sometimes it'll come back and say, do you want a professional tone? Do you want a more friendly tone? Do you want, and it works with the tone of it. I actually did it full vulnerability. I put in a whole bunch of information about our panel that we had, our panel discussion, our character people, and put in there that they were from various backgrounds and what we talked about, and I put some information in there about character ed, and then I just said, can you generate a nice thank you note to each of these panelists for me? And it just amazes me with how how many seconds before it does. But then I'm pretty anal, so that I take it and then I read it and I think, well, that doesn't sound like me, and this is what I would like to do. But I think it does kind of provide it does make some of those kinds of tasks easier. But yeah, it's kind of creepy when you open it up and it says, "Hi, Maureen, what are we doing today?" Yeah.
So. Dr. Spellman, I kind of use it the same way you do, but even sometimes with work, I can or even just in life, I've always been a person who gets really stuck on like a verbiage or language. I'll be like, ugh, I used this word twice in the same sentence or the sentence before, and I get really stuck. And that used to really take a lot of time. I probably was a little bit too worried about it. So just saying like, I don't like this, I used to like Google a synonym for a word if I didn't like it. So now just to be able to put in a sentence saying like, I don't like how this sounds, um, has actually freed up some time for me in cognitive space. So I do appreciate it. But I am still like you. I will never just copy and let it go. I will look at it and say, nah, it doesn't really sound like me. So I might take like parts of it. Um, but it has helped in that way to free up some of my thinking because I can get stuck on stuff and perseverate and overthink it. So
Yeah, and I can get pretty amazed with what it can do. So again, being very vulnerable here, full disclosure, I'm on a committee at the college that is an assessment committee, right? So it's a college-wide assessment committee, and we have a wonderful chair of the committee, and she's like this Excel like genius. I don't like Excel. I tiptoe around it very lightly. And she had sent, you know, directions and lovely woman, definitely on the spectrum, had sent directions that were like this long of, how to go in this Excel sheet and to give feedback and to find the assessments and find the reports and the plans and all this kind of thing. And I was doing good. I was really proud of myself. I thought, I am really learning something new. And then it came to like her directions for how to give feedback within the cell of the Excel sheet. And I tried what she told me so many times, and I'm thinking, and she's the kind of person that when I sent her the question, she sent me back even more directions that made my head spin even more. So I dumped it all into Chat GPT and said, I am not an Excel person. I can manage this, I can do this, but when I get to this step, I have no clue what to do. I am frustrated. Can you explain to me how I can navigate these cells to do what I need to do? I got back the nicest tone, step by step, but it started out with, don't worry. This is not unusual. People who aren't familiar with Excel, this is overwhelming. Here's step one, here's step two, here's step three, here's step four. And I thought, oh, and it worked. So I thought, okay, so there's that was probably the tipping point when I thought, I think I'm changing my mind a little bit about AI. But I thought that was really helpful to me because it was able to break down the steps, and it obviously someone somewhere has put a lot in there about Excel. Um, and it changed my life because I had to do 29 reports and I didn't know how to put them. And you know me, I had written out all my feedback, but I couldn't put it in. It's like I had all my notes, but I couldn't get it into this sheet that she wanted it. So I was very grateful to, I keep saying to my husband, I think I need to name it because it's calling my name all the time. I think I need to name it, but then
my principal calls his Val.
Okay. Well, I know we call our GPS in the car Bridget, but that's just because my husband's Irish and he likes to do that. So I'll have to come up with a different name for Chat GPT. So I've been babbling. You've been listening for an hour and a half. So I think it's time to take a break. Let's take a 15-minute break. See you at about 15 minutes. How's that? Good enough? Well, I'm glad you're feeling better. Yeah, these things they knock the starch out of us, I think. And sometimes it's just your body saying, "Okay, you need to take care of me for a change. You got to listen." So, yeah. Yeah. I know it's frustrating my husband to just not do much today after those two different surgeries and whatnot, and he's just been prowling around the house like a little lost lamb because he's so used to being busy and being out in the job sites and doing things. And um, he finally put on his sunglasses to hide his big black eye and drove to the pharmacy to get his ointment just to get out of the house. He was all excited that he got outside, got some fresh air. So we're creatures of habit, but we need to take care of ourselves. So
Yeah, and now he's stuck back in the house for a couple days. It's too cold to go out.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I have no problem staying put. That's fine. You can find plenty of things to do. So let me continue. I don't want to bore you to death with this presentation, so please, if it's really bad, let me know. Um, But there's just a couple of other things that he talked about that I think are important talking about. So um, one of the third guiding principle he talks about is, I guess you can't, wouldn't probably imagine why, but is near and dear to my heart, right? Because he talks about the importance of integrity. And you know me, when we're talking about different virtues and whatnot, it's critical for me. But I think he talks about the idea that we have to have not only academic integrity, but we have to make sure that we have opportunities for students to learn. And he talks a lot about the difference between, an approach that would be behaviorist versus a humanist. So just to kind of refresh your memory a little bit, dig back. When you're thinking about, you know, uh, academic integrity and say something like cheating, right? Um, so one of the things we know is that students sometimes access these tools, and when they do, it kind of creates an urgency among us because right away our hearts and our fears go to cheating. One of the interesting studies was that that showed that 2 years after the release of ChatGPT 3.5, which was the first one that was, really conversational, the rates of students cheating remained unchanged. Now, that's really not good news because before and after the release of ChatGPT, a staggering 65% of students reported they had cheated at least once in the previous month. So a large percentage of students who cheat really don't view this as a violation of academic integrity. So telling students what not to do is not the same as teaching them what to do. And we know that. So if we value academic integrity, we need to take the time to teach students the skills and the strategies that will ensure that they have it, right? So when you think about it, I think the descriptions on this slide are pretty clear that, you know, cheating is where you're misrepresenting your knowledge and your skills and you get undue credit for something. But integrity is an entirely different thing where it's a commitment to really representing the knowledge and skills you actually possessed. Um, and so when you think about it, transparency means that they can document their resources or sources and they can explain or expand on their learning, which is really critical when we're talking about intentional teaching and learning. When you think about it, the behaviorist versus the humanist is an interesting thing to kind of look at because when you think about it, the biggest tools in the behaviorist toolbox are usually things like rules and consequences, right? So a behaviorist policy would, probably not frame the issue in terms of what students should do, but it focuses more on consequences. It often sends, if you have an academic integrity policy that's behaviorist, it's going to send mixed messages to students about what plagiarism is and is not. Um, you know, maybe talking about using textbooks as sources, but not really explaining how to formally cite that. AI is kind of tacked on to those types of policies as an afterthought rather than thoughtfully integrated. And generally, they don't really talk about the form and function of AI. So they talk about AI as though it was any other tool that students could use. And if identifying punishments and cheating were enough, then we wouldn't have any academic integrity issues, and that would have been resolved long before AI came on. But rules and consequences, when they're a part of it, that's a really behaviorist approach because it doesn't really look at the root cause of the cheating. When you think about it, there are humanistic theories, however, that we can consider that maybe help us to create conditions that support academic integrity. One of the ones they talk about in his book is the expectancy value theory, which is just based on the premise that students make rational decisions whether or not they decide how much effort to invest in a task. So expectancy is really like whether or not they believe they can successfully accomplish it. And then the value of it is whether or not that task is important to the student. So in a perfect world, the student's expectations and value are positive, and they're confident that they can complete the task, and it's just challenging enough to keep their interest, but not so challenging that they feel overwhelmed. And so they see a value in successfully completing it. But when those expectations and values are not aligned, if a student believes a task is too difficult, they may rationalize cheating and they may see it as, well, oh, everybody does it. And if a student's friend asks them to help in a way that violates integrity, then they're kind of looking at, well, what do I value more? What about this relationship with my friend? And sometimes when they get stuck, they just may decide to cheat instead of asking for help because they don't want to be judged. They don't want to be seen as incompetent or unworthy. And so, when you dig into the research on cheating, researchers have found that students are less likely to cheat when they have opportunities to provide input into their learning experiences, and that there are low stakes formative assessments that help them when they feel a sense of belonging to a community that values integrity and effort. There's less cheating when they believe the teacher cares about them and their learning, and they care about their teacher's opinion of them. And they're actually invested in furthering their own learning, and they see their assignments as something that's going to help them to grow and to learn. That's not always the situation. So the action steps he suggests here start with the ones that you see on the screen here. He talks about establishing clear school-wide expectations, and making it clear that you take time to teach important vocabulary. So teach students what is integrity. Talk about what plagiarism is. Talk about intellectual property. What is paraphrasing? What is quoting? What is fair use of material? And what are things that are common knowledge, and how do you attribute things? A lot of times it's important to have consistent expectations, and then you want to make sure that you have things like formative assessments and developmental feedback and scaffolding, where you take large assignments and break them into smaller steps, and giving students advance notice for tests and projects. Those types of things can support them in wanting to move forward and be less likely to resort to just cheating to accomplish the task. Not always, but in a perfect world, that would be what we would talk about. Um, I think too often students are kind of expected to just interpret these policies and abide by them. And I think it's important for us to articulate our expectation so that everyone knows the role that they play. So when you think about responsibilities, well, I think administrators have a real strong responsibility to work collaboratively to establish a clear and comprehensive policy that's aligned with the school's mission and purpose. The administrator really needs to provide information and resources to all stakeholders and to communicate the importance and value of academic integrity. Administrators need to provide professional learning to build their teachers' capacity, and they need to ensure that the policy is followed in a manner that's consistent and timely and objective and fair. Teachers, on the other hand, really have the responsibility to communicate the importance of academic integrity as an essential part of the learning process. Teachers need to plan units and lessons that provide students with the opportunity to learn the content and help them with gain the skills that are necessary to accomplish those assignments. They need to provide students with advance notice of due dates, break major assignments into smaller steps, create clear parameters about what resources can be or cannot be used, and actually use instructional time to teach and provide models and discuss about how to act with integrity. I think there should be always questions about transparency as a part of the normal instruction. Make sure that students understand it's okay to seek help, ask questions, and get feedback they can respond to. And it's, of course, always important to follow up with our administrators if we're a teacher and if we have concerns or there's possible violations. Students, on the other hand, have a lot of responsibilities too. It's important that they participate and complete assignments and ask questions, right? It's important that they seek clarification if they're not sure about instructions or deadlines. They have to learn how to manage their time. They need to follow expectations about what resources can be used and cannot, and they need to document the use of any resources. They need to understand the school's policy, their definitions of integrity and plagiarism and cheating, and if they don't understand it, they need to be able to talk to their teachers about it if they're unsure about a decision. And they need to demonstrate honesty in decisions. And I think Frontier takes it even a step further, and he talks about that parents and guardians need to be familiar with and supportive of the school's integrity policies. They need to support students' positive choices, and they need to encourage their students to see that productive struggle and perseverance is an essential part of the learning process. They need to encourage their students to seek help when they need it and to advocate for their own learning needs. And they need to help their students balance academic versus extracurricular versus social and personal interests, and as well as their physical and emotional well-being. So there's a responsibility on all of those ends. Action step number 3 that he talks about is kind of interesting because he talks about establishing those parameters as to when and how AI can be used. And this is really important because you think about the questions on this slide. If you can anticipate and clarify answers to questions like these, then both students and teachers benefit. Teachers can ensure they're making accurate inferences about their students, And also students are empowered to use their autonomy, to use tools from such as AI tools in a way that are, aligned with their expectations for integrity. And I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but like all of these slides are in the Canvas course for you. So if you are interested in pursuing more in depth about these types of questions. The action step number 4 in this last piece is all about looking at these kinds of things that we call integrity, transparency, and explainability, which is kind of interesting that he uses these words. We used to say that integrity meant being honest about doing your own work and citing sources. Generative AI kind of blurs those lines about what students seem to have accomplished and maybe what technology has accomplished for them. So they need to become accustomed to sharing evidence and having conversations about these things. That integrity means being honest about your own work. Transparency means being clear about the resources you've used. And being able to explain or justify or clarify your work is going to be critical. So when you think about talking about integrity, these are some questions that you could use with your students. It's just, I think they make sense. These are the kinds of things that we want to ask them. We want them to be able to look at these kinds of questions, answer these kind of questions, and build their capacity to be reflective learners. And these are things that I think you can, easily ask your students, and can ask of them, because it really helps them to stay in the right area. So the last guiding principle for school leaders is fidelity before efficiency. And this, of course, is where we're thinking about the idea that we know that AI tools have tremendous potential, and they can support efficiency, and they can automate a lot of routine teaching tasks and clerical tasks, which can then allow us to have more time to spend engaged in high leverage practices. However, we have to remember that when we use these tools, sometimes they come at a cost, right? So AI tools could automate elements of the teaching process in ways that actually diminish our ability to understand what our students' needs are. They could also be used in ways that allow teachers to create instructional resources more efficiently, but we have to make sure that they are actually aligned with students' needs. So when you think about some of the things that come to play here, one of the big things that comes to play here is the idea of teacher burnout. And I think that's a challenge, because there was a recent study that talked about teachers, surprise, surprise, teachers feel overworked and overwhelmed at rates higher than other professions, especially because we've got such increased workloads. There's been extreme politicization, and there's broader social challenges that are impacting the classroom. There was another study that Frontier quotes, and he talks about that 58% of the teachers in that study reported experiencing frequent job-related stress. 56 reported feeling burned out, and 23% reported they were likely to leave their job by the end of the year. So given these challenges, yeah, many people say, let's figure out how AI could create some efficiencies and provide some relief. But it's also important to look at the other side, that 77% of the teachers said they were not likely to leave their job, and they were more positive. Actually, the people in that 77% talked about the fact that they really were optimistic that they can positively affect students, that they have developed positive relations with students, they've developed positive relationships with other teachers. So when you think, despite the data, there are plenty of us who are satisfied with our roles and feel a strong sense of competence and relatedness. We just want to be careful that AI tools don't diminish our sense of that. So when you're talking about fidelity, this is really like the essence of the student-teacher relationship, understanding where we are now, where we're going, and the path to get there. And AI tools could be used in ways that would undermine that. Teacher expertise is important, using the right strategy in the right way at the right time to get the right results. It's much more than effectiveness or competence. Experts really look at things different. And expertise is not the same as experience. Experts can kind of engage in deliberate practice and monitor and reflect on the impact of their strategies, and then turn that into action and ask kind of important questions. So there are questions that are important. They're transformational. But I think it's really good to do that. We need to think about what tasks can be automated to create more time for teachers, and then they can spend their time within their expertise providing high quality learning for their students. What could be automated but might undermine that? And, how can we use it to really work on those routine or those repetitive tasks so we can spend more time with our students in their learning. So those are big transformational questions. I don't have any easy answers, but they're good questions to ask, right? If we're moving forward. So the last set of action steps will start with the twin sins. And Frontier calls these the twin sins of efficiency or automaticity without fidelity. And so what he talks about is that when you have these twin sins, there's a diminished capacity for teachers to support students' learning. And they really refer to the misapplication of AI tools. It's not really an issue with the tool itself. Um, so the twin sins can kind of help you understand what not to do, right? So when we think about AI, we need to make sure that if we're looking at routine tasks, make sure that we're looking at the ones that are, we're using it to free us up to invest more time in intentional teaching and learning and spend more time engaging with strategies that are important for students. And when we talk about dialogue and we talk about those kinds of things, I think these questions are really important. When we're talking about the dialogue that has to do with these things, I think these questions on the screen are things that you may want to, you might want to hang on to this slide because this is really important. These kinds of questions are really helpful. We need to ask questions about capacity, about fidelity, about efficiency and automaticity, and what are the opportunities and what are the opportunity costs. These, I think, are very helpful. This slide is just a little bit about conversation starters that people can use. And these are conversation starters that we can have with each other, we can have in teams, or we can have by ourselves, right? But I think we have to start asking questions about developing resources and whether or not teachers should use AI for those kinds of things. We have to ask questions about instructional design, and we have to ask questions particularly about assessment. So the action step number 3 is, kind of flows from that. And action step number 3 talks a lot about using that expert approach, right? To really take these things in a way that's really helpful. I think, again, the questions here are important. We need to think about what's important for student learning. What evidence are we looking for? How are you going to monitor the impact? How will you ensure the integrity? All of those things are really critical. So kind of winding on, I think the last one is talking about transparency and explainability. This one I think is interesting because transparency we're pretty familiar with talking about, but I think explainability is something we don't often use, especially with AI tools, but I think sometimes even other times. So we don't ask students to actually explain, the meaning of things or, give you the rationale for why they did some things. And I think we have to do it for ourselves and we have to do it for students. So I think we have to ask again more questions. We have to ask about and reflect, what are the things that students need to know? How are they going to have opportunities? And if we use AI, are we reviewing, editing, and revising? Or what's happening with it? Are we going to assess students' work and verify the accuracy? Or how are we going to give feedback if we're using AI to do some of that assessment? Again, more questions than ever. I think that I have more questions than answers, but it's important to think about, what are the things that were used? What are the prompts that were used to develop these things? Did you really design your unit the way you would if you weren't using AI? And I think it's really important to have feedback for our students. So lots of information, probably too much information. I think, oh, good, you're not asleep. That's good. Any thoughts? Any comments? Any questions?
I have a comment. I sorry, I've listened to as a high school teacher, we hear AI presentations like all the time because AI is a big thing in high school. It's an issue. I try to encourage it obviously in the way kind of like how you presented it, how it's not going away. So instead of trying to fight it, you almost need to embrace it and show students how to properly use it. So I use it a lot for social studies and economics too, and for cool things. But I just like the way you presented it. So I don't know, because you said this was your first time presenting something like this, like for AI. I had a presenter one time literally stand in front of the entire district of high school teachers and tell us that if we don't use AI, we're going to lose our jobs. And it was a whole big thing. And she just was criticizing us. And it felt more of an attack versus a helpful tool. So very good. And she had a background in AI and technology. So the way I really liked your presentation, and I honestly think like I wish a lot of my peers got to hear it because it was so helpful. So I just want to compliment you on that.
Oh, thank you. I'm embarrassed now. How about Miss Technology, Ellen? Anything that you took away from it that you didn't already know? Did I bore you for an hour and a half?
I knew everything.
Of course you did. Of course you did. Okay. Sorry about that. Next time I'll have you be the guest speaker and you can present. How's that?
I have given many a presentation on
I bet you have. Did I make any big mistakes?
No, no.
Oh, good. Okay. Little ones?
No.
Oh, okay. Mary's joining us. Okay, let her in. So, the slides are there. All I did was interpret Frontier's book, but I think he presents it really well, and I just wanted to summarize it for you. And I think and I just presented the first part of the book that's really all about leaders. So um, when you're thinking about your role as a teacher, I guess I'm not getting any residuals from the book, but I would encourage you to buy it because I think the second half of the book is really helpful and really has some real concrete things for the classroom teachers to think about and use. Any questions that pop in? Okay. All right. So it's 7:04. And I noticed that Mary popped in, so that's great. We can stop recording because I've been recording.